After more than 3 years of exclusively building apps with FlutterFlow, I've decided to return to the no-code app builder that I credit with launching my no-code journey back in 2020, Bubble. Back then, I explored Bubble along with several other no-code builders, but once I discovered FlutterFlow, I was blown away by its ease of use and flexibility, and I never looked back. However, time has passed and tools have evolved. Today I'm revisiting Bubble to give it another try, curious to see how it has grown and whether it now offers features or capabilities that might make me consider switching back. It's an opportunity to reassess and explore whether Bubble can once again become a key player in my app building toolkit. All right, and here I am logged into Bubble, and the first thing I notice is that there's this upgrade, right? Free upgrade for 2 weeks next to my apps. I haven't seen that before, and we'll talk more about that a little bit later. So let's go ahead and open one of my apps here that I've built ages ago. And I get this message, upgrade Bubble version. I'm gonna click on upgrade, and it goes ahead and upgrades it. And now we notice this create designs with AI. And so if you click here, you see some designs. Okay, so it's kind of like with FlutterFlow, where you can create a page as well. So they've decided to build this out. Okay, so if we go back here, and now we're in the UI kind of design phase. Now, the first thing you need to know about Bubble is that Bubble is a complete proprietary system. Okay, so you're building your app, and your app gets converted into this code that runs on their proprietary platform. Okay, so it's completely proprietary, it's closed off, and that's unlike with FlutterFlow, which is essentially Flutter under the hood. So you use FlutterFlow to build your app, and then you can get that code and take it anywhere and run it however you want to run it. So that's like the biggest difference between these two tools. Bubble is proprietary, FlutterFlow is Flutter under the hood, generates Flutter. You can take it anywhere, you can host it how you want to, you can run it anywhere. It's your code. Okay, that's number one. The second thing that I want to talk about is the UI. Now, when I first started to build no-code apps with Bubble back in the day, when I started to kind of get familiar with Bubble's UI, the feeling and the impression that I had was it's kind of like building a website, right? So it's very, very similar to tools such as Webflow, and there are many, many other tools like that. So immediately it did not feel like I'm in this like serious development environment, right? It's almost like I'm building a website, and this website is going to run and people are going to visit and all of that. So it didn't feel like I'm building code, right? I'm developing. Okay, even though it's very, very powerful, you can build apps, you can do all these things. The first impression that I had here is it's kind of has this website feel. Whereas with FlutterFlow, when I began using it, I immediately knew that I'm going to be building apps. It's just the feeling I had, right? Maybe it's more kind of developer friendly, maybe the terminology, maybe I was kind of felt at home with the UI, with all the elements and all these widgets and all of this. I just felt it was more kind of development serious. Okay, so that was like one of my first impressions when I started to use Bubble, and now when I go back to it, that is something that I feel right now. But overall, when it comes to the UI and designing your app, Bubble has lots and lots of little components. I'm not going to be calling them widgets because that is a FlutterFlow thing, and I feel kind of that's what they are in FlutterFlow. With Bubble, you have all of these different components that you can simply drag and drop anywhere, and you can place them, and then you select it, and you have all of this here. You have this appearance and all of that. So it's very, very user friendly. It's very user friendly. But having said that, I do prefer the FlutterFlow way of kind of designing it. I like the rows, I like the columns, I like the constraints, I like the kind of the layout mechanics. I like the predictability. I like being able to place a component inside of another component and have it behave a certain way, right? Have it behave in kind of this predictable way. And I also feel that FlutterFlow's kind of this properties panel here is a little bit more kind of polished, right? So if you take a look at this appearance, you have an option to get this element to not be clickable, right? So if I do this, now it's not clickable. But if you look at FlutterFlow, right? If I come over here, well, I can scroll down and I have button disable options, right? So I can disable it. I can click here and I can have a condition. So I can just go and hit and say false, okay, just false, something like that. So I can put true, right? Okay, this is true, right? So regardless, it's not going to be clickable, okay? So it's true. Or I can have a condition here, but it's not really about conditions. It's just, it's a little bit more kind of polished, right? I just felt immediately more at home in FlutterFlow because it's a little bit more technical, okay? But nevertheless, there's still lots of really cool things. And a good example of that is when you select an element here, right? You can create a workflow, right? So if I go ahead and let's say click here, I can add a workflow, right? And this is in the appearance tab, right? So a workflow is not really appearance, right? A workflow is more logic, right? It's not anything that the user sees. It's more like what happens, right? It's the process. Whereas here, it's here, right? It's on the appearance tab. Whereas in FlutterFlow, if I click here, there's nothing really logic, right? The logic happens here. This is inside the action flow editor, right? So this is another thing that I noticed. And, some of these things are appearance based, but then, you have some of these things that are not appearance based, right? So I feel like they should kind of polish it up, clean it up a little bit, create another tab that's exclusively dedicated to like logic stuff, right? Workflows and things like that. I don't feel that it should be here. Okay, so this is absolutely correct because it's visible, but this thing should be in its own tab. And so all of this I feel needs to be cleaned up. And another thing here is that it really hasn't changed since the first time I started using it, right? It looks exactly the same. Maybe they added a couple of things, but even looking at it, I feel like I have a pretty good visual memory. And I feel this is exactly the same, right? If you guys noticed, if you use Bubble and you noticed they added a couple of elements, let me know in the comments below. But I feel this is exactly the same. Same thing for layout. And then you have these conditions here, right? That if they have to do with visibility, I feel they should be here on the appearance, just like how they are in FlutterFlow, okay? But nevertheless, this is a fairly powerful UI interface here that allows you to create all kinds of interesting UI elements and stuff like that. You also have this responsive tab that is kind of baked into FlutterFlow, right? FlutterFlow with Flutter, it's responsive by default, right? It already has these responsive elements because it's mobile first, and you have that responsiveness built in. You just kind of have to use it. Whereas here, it's something extra, right? Because you're starting out with a kind of a desktop kind of interface. So that's another huge difference between the two tools. The next thing I want to talk about is the logic, right? So without the logic, all you have is a web page or a website. You don't really have an app, right? So here in Bubble, it's really nice because I have this, web app kind of first view, this kind of desktop view. And so here I can build out a website and kind of get started there. And later I can add some logic, right? And the way you add logic is by adding a workflow, right? So I can click on something here. Let's say I have this thing here and, I want to make it clickable. I can click here, add a workflow. And from here on, I can create an action, right? So this is our trigger here, right? This is what happens. This thing gets triggered when the element gets clicked, right? When text name is clicked. And here I can create an action. And I have lots of things, right? I have account stuff, I have navigation, data that we're going to be talking about in a couple of moments. I have email, payment, analytics, element actions, plugins, and custom events, right? Where I can, create custom events, schedule API or workflow, things like that. So pretty much anything that you want to do, you'll be able to do it using this kind of built-in logic engine. So for instance, if you want to navigate to another page, I can click here and I can set my destination to, let's say, checkout. I can even send some data, specific data, right? Like you have arguments, parameters in FlutterFlow. We can do that over here very, very easily. If I click here, we can specify the type of data that we're going to be filling in here, right? And so as the case happens to be with this app, this is just data local to the app, okay? So it's kind of like app state and FlutterFlow, stuff like that. But what's cool about it is that let's say I want to display the car's name. Well, I have this current cell, right? This is current cell's car, but I can select, let's say I want to select name, but after that, I have all of these operators, right? Capitalized words, uppercase, lowercase, formatted as, used as, trimmed, number of characters, all of these things. And none of these things are built into FlutterFlow by default. Like, you don't have all of this, right? All of this, like, if you want to implement these things, they need to be done either as a code expression or a custom function. And most of these can be probably implemented as a code expression, right? So if I go into FlutterFlow and here I have an item, well, guess what? I have an item. What do I want to do? Well, nothing. It's a string, and I really can't do anything, right? Bubble allows me to kind of do more work in it, right? Trim it, all of these little things. And these are really, really nice because a lot of times they're very, very helpful, right? So here, what I need to do is I need to copy it, come back over here and do like a code expression. And then I need to create an argument, come over here, and then I need to paste it. And now I'm passing it as var1, and here I can just have code. So I can do like trim something like this, and that's gonna trim the variable, right? So I'm gonna check it. It should be no problem. And this is going to remove like blank space from the front of the word and remove blank space from the end of the word, right? So just give us that word. And so what I just did is something that can be done with Bubble very, very quickly. Okay, so you can just format it, you can trim it, you can split it. You have regex, which stands for regular expression. So this is really, really nice. It's very, very handy. But having said that, it's not very complicated to do it with FlutterFlow, because one can argue that it's even more powerful because it kind of gives you more power, and you can simply wrap it as an argument to a code expression or a custom function for more complex work. And here you can do anything that you want. Arguably, you can even do more things here as an expression, as a custom expression here, this code expression, that you can do with Bubble with those built-in functions. And so it's really up to you what you prefer. I personally prefer this approach, FlutterFlow's approach, because I know that I can pretty much do anything that I want. And I think this is what, FlutterFlow's kind of methodology and design is, right? Just give you the tools so that you can go out and do whatever you want. Whereas Bubble is kind of holding your hand a little bit more. It gives you a ton of things that you can just use right away without needing to resort to looking up all these methods and using ChatGPT or etc., etc. It's just easier. I personally prefer FlutterFlow's approach, but you may prefer Bubble's approach there. Okay, so I really, really like that. I remember when I was building my apps with Bubble, I use this all the time, and I really enjoyed kind of this ability. Contains, doesn't contain. Really, really nice here. Okay, another really cool thing about Bubble is that you have access to your app as an API, right? So if I head over to settings and I click API, we have these public API endpoints. Okay, so we have this enable workflow API and backend workflows, workflow API root URL. So I can potentially execute this API call, and that's going to trigger a workflow. Okay, and here we have a data API, right? So this is my API endpoint for these data types. Okay, so I can simply, access externally this API here, and I'm going to be able to access my data here. And so this is really, really nice in those situations where you may be building your app here, but you may want to have access or trigger workflows via some other app. Okay, now with FlutterFlow, you can't really access your data because FlutterFlow does not, it doesn't really have a database. If you don't really count like app state, it doesn't really have like a robust database. Typically, you need to use a third-party database, but we're gonna get into that a little bit later in the video. And so this is really, really nice. Next, let's talk about the database, right? You can't really build a serious app without having a database that's gonna act as a repository for the data that your app needs, right? So you're going to be reading data, you're going to be writing data. You need to store that data somewhere while the app is not running, okay? And this is where Bubble truly shines, because if you head over here, you have a full featured database component here with relationships, with complex types. Okay, so as an example, if you head over to this tab here, data types, we have my types here. Okay, so we have car, category, product, seller, user, etc., etc. So this car here, this is what I created, right? So we have car, these are built in, and we have category name. I can go ahead and create a new field. Let's say engine type, something like this. And let's say this is text. Okay, I can do that. And I can also go ahead and, create another field that will be an array, right? So let's say color, and let's say, we're gonna say text, and I say multiple entries. Okay, so now it can have multiple entries, right? This color lists of text. And here, if you click on app data, I can actually create these objects here, right? So we're looking at all my cars. These are the two cars I have. I can add a new entry here. And let's say category is sedan, color is blue, engine type is 3-liter, and let's say this is a BMW, I don't know, M3. Okay, so there I go ahead and created the new entry, and now we have another car here, right? And I can do the same thing for all the other data types, right? I can come over here, I have products, possibly some sellers, etc., etc. And this is really, really nice. Plus here we have option sets, which is a way of creating a list of possible values. Okay, so here I can say, let's say my car color. I can come over here and I can say, well, new option, blue, red, black. Okay, so I have three colors, and then later I can go ahead and use this, right? When I create my color here, I can go ahead and do that, right? So for instance, if I delete this one and recreate it, I can say, well, I'm gonna say I have a field name color, and the type is car color. Okay, and that means that I can only select any of these options, and I cannot create any other option that's there already. And then I can go back to my app over here, and let's say I define this thing to be a cars, and here I can come and say data source is type car from my database, and I can also add a constraint. I can say, well, I only want these cars, a filter, etc., etc. So it's a fairly impressive kind of database backend there, right? This is something that I loved about Bubble right when I started using it, because it makes app development and prototyping very, very quickly and easily. Now, FlutterFlow, on the other hand, does not really offer that, okay? So it does have something called an app state, which is fairly powerful. You also have custom data types, right? So you have these things here where you can create your custom data types. So here I have a custom data types with all of these fields. I have a user records with these fields, and I can use that in my app state, okay? But if you're building a serious app, chances are you're not going to be relying on app state all that much. You want like a real backend. And so I recommend people use Supabase, which is what I use, and it's the easiest kind of backend to get started. But that's another backend, right? That's another piece in the puzzle, right? That's kind of another element in your overall architecture, right? So it's a lot easier when you have something built in. On the other hand, Supabase is fairly standard, like Flutter is fairly standard. It kind of makes sense being able to use Supabase, because that is a skill that you can master, you can become really good at it, and you're using like a world-class product, right? We don't really know what they use as the backend. They could have rolled out their own backend. And so once again, this is a great feature. It's really nice that it exists, but mastering Supabase, understanding Supabase is going to take you a long way, because that is something you're going to be using all the time, regardless what kind of apps you're going to be building. So I do like that Bubble has a built-in kind of database component, but I also am very, very comfortable with using Supabase, because Supabase is a great product. It's fast, it's scalable, and so it's not a big deal. And FlutterFlow supports it natively, right? So it's not a big deal, but still being able to do it, as another component without setting up anything else is a big bonus as well. Another thing about Bubble is that it has a plugin subsystem. Okay, so if you come over here, you can add various plugins. So my app has an API connector. And by the way, if you want to use API features, make API calls, that is a plugin in Bubble. And that is something built in FlutterFlow. And here I have a Stripe connector that allows me to potentially build customers and make money with this app. And here I can click here and I can add other plugins. Now, mind you, I need to upgrade my plan to purchase plugin subscriptions. Okay, plugin subscriptions can only be purchased on a paid plan. Okay, so if there's some plugin that requires a subscription, guess what? I won't be able to use it on this plan. Okay, and so there's lots and lots of plugins that allow you to do all kinds of things. I even have a video on my channel that teaches you how to create your own Bubble plugin from scratch. So I definitely explore this area, and I'm happy to say that I greatly prefer kind of FlutterFlow's approach. I mean, I like the fact that I have my custom code, I can create custom widgets, custom actions, and custom functions. And this is all standard. This is all Flutter. You can use ChatGPT to do it. It's very, very easy. It's just a little bit of extra code. It's not a big deal. And in fact, if you've been seeing my kind of complex apps video tutorials, you've probably noticed that a lot of my custom functions are like one line. Okay, the majority of my custom functions are like very, very short, very, very concise. They're like one line, maybe a couple of lines at the max. And you also have pop.dev where you can go out, you can get a free plugin, you can install, you can have it here. So you don't need to upgrade to use plugins here, right? Pop.dev has a lot, all free plugins there. So you can simply get them, you can use them here, and you can do all of that on your free plan here. You don't really need to upgrade or anything like that. And I remember when I was trying to build a plugin, it was a lot of work, right? It was a lot of work. It's all proprietary. It's all in its own thing. It's a lot of work. It wasn't that straightforward kind of to do it as it is with FlutterFlow. With FlutterFlow, for me, it just makes sense. It's easy. It's quick. It's just it's a lot more straightforward when it comes to doing it with FlutterFlow. Of course, I mean, if you're dedicated to Bubble, if you like Bubble, if you like the UI, if you like how it works, you can go out and you can become like a master when it comes to Bubble plugins, right? You can master that art, and you can become really good at building all kinds of plugins, integrating plugins and things like that. So it's more about which one you prefer. I definitely prefer the FlutterFlow's approach. It just kind of makes more sense to me. But it's nice knowing that if you want to extend your app with plugins, whether your own plugins or third-party plugins, you can do so as well. Now, when it comes to testing your app, this is where Bubble shines, right? Because all I need to do is click on preview and I'm gonna see my app right here. And that should be fairly instant, right? So here's my app. As you can see, I'm displaying kind of, this is the name here. This is the category. We have some IDs. I think these are like, object IDs here. And as you noticed, it took me just like a couple of seconds to go from this design area to actually seeing my live app. Okay, and granted, I still need to kind of fix it up a little bit. I need to align it correctly, but still, it's very, very quick. It's very, very fast. I can also inspect various elements and seeing if they are holding the right values, right? I can come over here, I can see here, I can click here. So you also have that debugging features there as well. Whereas with FlutterFlow, the first time you want to preview your app, you want to test your app, you're going to click here and you're going to need to wait a couple of minutes probably, right? That first time is going to take time, right? So it says here, this should take 2 to 3 minutes. And typically that's how long it takes. Okay, sometimes it's faster, sometimes it's slower, but it's gonna take a couple of minutes on average. Okay, but after that, the subsequent refreshes use something called a hot reload. Okay, so that's gonna be almost instant, and in fact it is pretty much instant. Okay, so if you're comfortable waiting a couple of minutes for this first load, the next ones are going to be almost instant. Okay, and I'm totally okay with it. I'm absolutely okay with it. But I gotta give credit where credit is due, and give respect to Bubble because it's very, very fast. Okay, it's very, very quick, and you don't really need to wait, especially when it comes to the first load as well. Now with FlutterFlow, you have a new feature called the Debug Panel. which was released fairly recently. And this is an amazing, amazing feature. I really, really love it because it tells me exactly what's happening, right? It tells me my app state, my global properties, and if I had more widgets here, it would tell me stuff about the widgets as well. It would tell me what's happening with my widgets. So I don't need to click anywhere, right? I can filter, I can search for a specific variable here, and I can find it, or I can just have kind of this bird's eye view and see exactly what's happening. And for me, that is awesome. I really, really like this. I love this feature. It just makes sense. It makes it super easy to debug and develop your apps. Now, let's say you've built out your app, you've tested it, it all works as expected. You now want to deploy your app into production and have real users start to check it out, hopefully maybe purchase some products, sign up for an account, etc., etc. Well, the problem with Bubble here is that I can't even do it. I need to upgrade to deploy. And if I click over here, I have various plans here. Now, it's not enough to upgrade to a particular plan. You also need to be aware of how much load your app is going to sustain. Okay, so if you're, just starting out and your app is not gonna see a lot of visitors, maybe you're testing, maybe you're trying to create a prototype, then typically you can start off with the starter plan. But if your app becomes fairly popular, then you need to think about how many workload units per month your app is going to consume. Okay, so this will depend on the kind of plan that you want to visit. And I have heard that even the starter plan with its 175K workload units per month is not going to be sufficient for a relatively successful app. You will need to upgrade to one of these higher plans. Okay, let me know in the comments below if you've heard the same thing, but that is what I heard. And so this is a point of contention with a lot of Bubble users. The fact is that you'll need to pay decent money for the ability to deploy your app. And if your app is relatively successful, you will need to upgrade to one of these higher plans here. Okay. And so if I click here in my settings and I click on app plan here, I can see that I have 0% of the of your available workloads have been used. So I haven't really been used anything. But here you will see, how many you're using, these workload units, and whether you'll need to upgrade to a higher tier plan for your app to continue being deployed, okay? On the other hand, with FlutterFlow, you don't have that problem at all, right? With FlutterFlow, you're essentially developing Flutter code that you can take and do whatever you want with it, right? So if you're developing a mobile app, you can actually publish it, right? So I can come over here and I can say, I have a web publishing screen here and I can publish it immediately, right? So this is my web publishing. I also have mobile deployment here. And as soon as I finish building my app and I deploy it, well, if I don't want to continue developing this app, I don't really need to pay for FlutterFlow, right? I've developed the app, I've designed it, I've tested it, I've fixed all the bugs. The app is running and I'm happy with it. I don't really need to go out and keep paying for FlutterFlow. Whereas with Bubble, I need to keep paying for it, right? Because deploying and all of that is part of the plan, right? I can't take my app somewhere. I can't just take it, put it in my pocket and go somewhere else to another provider. I can't really do that. Whereas with FlutterFlow, I can easily do that because I can take my app. Let's say I built a web app. Well, I can take my code and just deploy it on Amazon S3 and pay next to nothing, right, for the ability to host my app. This is something that I talked about in this video. And so this is something that I mentioned in the beginning of the video, but this is a big, big point, right? Obviously, if you're happy with Bubble and you kind of like its kind of design, the way everything kind of fits together, then more power to you. And so the decision came down for me is where do I feel more comfortable, okay? And I've used Bubble for quite a while before I discovered FlutterFlow. And with FlutterFlow, I feel a lot more comfortable. It just makes sense for me. And no, FlutterFlow has never paid me, has never, sponsored any of my videos. This is something that I believe in. I believe in FlutterFlow. I believe in this product. And that is why I teach it to people, because I feel this is the best product to build apps with. But Bubble is also a great product. It has its own advantages. It has its own kind of functionalities, its own techniques. And so if you're comfortable with the way Bubble works, then more power to you. But whereas I am a lot more comfortable with FlutterFlow, and in fact, with FlutterFlow, it's an evolving product, right? The UIs are changing. There's new features. You know, a lot of these features, they weren't here like a year ago or like half a year ago. Where with Bubble, like I come in and the screen is the same, like the layout is the same. I believe they changed these icons a little bit. I believe this property kind of panel here, this property pane, is exactly the same. I don't really see much difference here. I remember it had appearance, layout, and conditional, so they don't really clean it up. You know, it has this edit workflow, which is not really appearance. Like, why is that under appearance? That kind of annoyed me in the beginning, right? And so it would have been nice if they did like a big refresh, right? It's not really about the fact that I need to kind of pay for the service. I'm happy to pay for the service if I'm getting the value. But when I started to use Bubble and now coming back to it, I feel that the UI hasn't really changed. Or maybe there's some kind of minor things here and there, but it looks almost the same for me. Like it's 90% the same. And so with FlutterFlow, the UI is constantly changing. They're adding new features. You know, every week, every 2 weeks, there's a new feature here, there's a new feature there. Whereas with Bubble, I feel like this is exactly what I saw like back in 2020. And so let me know in the comments below if you feel the same or you disagree, or you know, you have some input, you have some insight. And so at this point, I definitely feel that FlutterFlow is the best no-code tool for most people when it comes to designing and building at least mobile apps. You can also build web apps as well. You can also build desktop apps too. And this is something that I talked about in some of the other videos. But when it comes to building mobile apps, this is mobile first. And I feel that FlutterFlow is the best tool right now when it comes to doing just that. Now, if you enjoyed this video and you're looking to use FlutterFlow, or you're already using FlutterFlow to build your apps, you're gonna get a ton of value when you check out our amazing Patreon community. Because when you join our Patreon community, you're gonna get access to all the apps that I've published on this channel. So all my FlutterFlow apps, they're on there. You can ask questions, you can view them, you can clone them, you can ask questions, you can connect with other community members. And in addition to that, you're also going to get access to some extra content. So I'm starting a new weekly series where I'm going to be sharing with you things that I've been working on this week, apps that I'm planning to build. I'm going to be answering questions. And so I plan on doing this weekly. And I had like one of the first episodes just recently where I talked about some of the videos that I'm working on. And so if you're serious about building apps with no code, you're serious about FlutterFlow, you're going to gain a ton more value by becoming a patron of this channel. And most importantly, when you join our Patreon community, you're going to be supporting this channel and supporting my work. And that is greatly, greatly appreciated. So if you love no code, you're serious about building apps, you want to build apps maybe for yourself, maybe for somebody else, maybe you want to contract and you want to start a software company, whatever it may be, you need to join our amazing Patreon community. And you can do just that via the first link in the description below the video.